I warned Charlotte there was a possibility that I wouldn't be here, and then I'm happy to say that I am. But I wanted to make the extra effort to be here for a whole set of reasons, because I think it's a fantastic project, and these wonderful women came and saw me and got me excited about it. But it was easy because I just want to pay a tribute tonight to Antony Barnett, because Antony Barnett became a friend of mine back in the 80s. And many of you in this room are so young that you don't, you were but in nappies or something at that time. But I can tell you that back in the 80s was a pretty miserable time too, rather similar to what we're experiencing now. And we set up a campaign, and it was Antony who led the way on it, called Charter 88. And Charter 88 was really confronting the fact that Thatcherism had kind of told us how our democracy was failing and so on. And that agenda, Charter 88, I'm happy to say, eventually whole bits of it, not in quite the fulsome way we would have wanted, but became the manifesto of the Labour Party for 1997. And we did a lot of hard work to get it to that point, it has to be said, of twisting arms, persuading people, taking them in dark corners and beating them up. And some of them took it because they thought this was a great set of ideas, and really believed in them, and some of them kind of only half believed in them, and so they didn't quite take full bloom. But all I can say is it meant that we ended up with devolution, reform of the House of Lords, reform of other aspects of Parliament. We got the Human Rights Act. We got the Freedom of Information Act. It was all those things that we'd been screaming about since 1988. Antony is a man who's always has fabulous ideas, and then once the internet was up and running and so on, he embarked on openDemocracy, which I think has been a great project. And any of you who have not heard of it and who are not subscribers, today you have to go out there and immediately subscribe to it, because you get fabulous articles about all manner of things from really very creative, interesting people of ideas. And that's why Antony is one of my friends, and to me a real heroic character in our lives, a great public intellectual. And one of the things that he spoke to me about in early days was of this idea was we must be doing something about what's happening to the justice system, and he knew how exercised I was about it all, and I'm glad to say that he fueled this with the support and bright ideas of others, and so it's come into being that openDemocracy has now parented Open Justice. And so I just want to say to all of you, I think it's a really important thing. Partly because justice issues, issues like legal aid, they kind of fall down the agenda for the general public. They can't see how it affects them. They can't see how law affects them at all. In fact, I remember a whip once saying to me when I wasn't voting the right way, it's just law. And I ended up writing a book with that title because it had so shocked me that he hadn't felt that law was of such importance in our lives. And in fact, in the lives of ordinary folk, this is not about, it's so easy to do this thing of fat cat lawyers and lawyers speaking as though it was about their own self-interest. It's actually about the fact that we lawyers tend to know better than anybody when the system's failing people, and it's our clients that teach us about the failures of law and the justice system. So, I mean, already you've heard what problems we're facing just now, and it's about, I hope, that Open Justice will be able to have a better kind of discourse around some of these issues, informed by all of you in this room who know this stuff. And many of you might be contributors to it, but also contributing to the ideas of those who will write on the subjects. The already mentioned has been the issue of access to justice. I mean, under the banner of austerity, the need to deal with the great debt, which now somehow has disappeared, because let me tell you, the cost of Brexit is going to be so huge that it's amazing that the money is being found for all of that, whereas it hasn't been found for some of the things that we might have felt was a greater priority. But access to justice and the whole way in which the legal aid reforms that took place under the coalition government, to the shame of Liberal Democrats, and you have to keep reminding people who signed up to some of this stuff of what it has done, because it really has been a shameful you know, kind of, if you like, stepping away from the great liberal consensus after the Second World War. And you were talking about that, the things that we took for granted, that somehow that the poor can get on with it, the ordinary folk can get on with it, and the system always works. Law always can work for the rich, for the oligarchs, for the corporates, and so on. They can always find their team of lawyers. But for ordinary people to find lawyers and to be able to afford lawyers for the things that happen to them is so hard. And the expertise that we're now seeing our system denuded of because of this, people who knew about welfare rights, people who know about prisons, people who know about family law for the really disadvantaged people, they're being driven off you know, the high street. They're being driven away from areas of practice which will be easy for ordinary people to get lawyering. And, you know, I watched in the last week or two where we've seen the Guardian, all credit to them, running the campaign on women appearing before the court and being cross-examined by the people who have been their abusers. And let me tell you, the reason why, of course, is because of the absence of legal aid. And people are appearing increasingly in front of very beleaguered courts. And so the judges, even although there is actually a stipulation that they should prevent this kind of thing happening, let it happen because they've got to get through the case in order to get on to the next one. And the system is really straining under the fact that so many people are appearing in court now unrepresented, without legal expertise, and people who are in the courts trying to run them, you know, judges and magistrates, you know, those who sit in. We don't call them magistrates anymore, many of them, but people who are sitting trying to manage this process are finding it so hard. And I'm glad you've spoken about the business of prisons. I mean, it was always a great regret to me that, and it's the temptations of politics and power, that people, that Labour also in government entered into this Dutch auction around sentencing and being tough on crime and so on. And it has ended up, I mean, we can't run away from this, and I say this as a Labour peer, we can't run away from the fact that the huge increase in numbers of people in prison happened under our watch. And of course it started under Michael Howard, and he started this business of ratcheting it up and making it an issue of which the tabloids loved, and prison works and so on. But we didn't challenge it and make the opposite arguments, that many of the people who end up in prison are people with real problems, and they shouldn't be there at all. Many of them are problems that can be addressed in very different ways. And so the prison has become an alternative to social services because we've denuded that of finances as well. So we've got to recognise what the seeds of all these problems are, but by God, have they come to a head in this particular government, which has been captured by its right wing. And so many of the things that we would have not imagined were possible are actually happening. I mean, that headline, "Enemies of the People," was one of the great. I mean, it was searing. It actually kind of was. I'm not Meryl Streep, so I can't do the thing of my stomach churned when I saw our next president doing something. But my stomach turned seeing the pictures of three judges up there as the enemies of the people, because they're dealing with some quite, narrow constitutional issue, and then their lives are poured over, and their wives and their so on, in the most disgraceful way, and supported on the media by Conservative members of Parliament like Ian Duncan Smith and Dominic Raab, and people who should know better, in the most disgraceful way. And what it is, it's about, I mean, for example, I appeared on a radio programme with Duncan Smith, and where he said, we should be actually, looking at the backgrounds of these people who are being appointed as judges and so on. So we go down the American road of having people's not understanding that somebody can have a political view, but they actually, when it comes to, I mean, particularly our most senior judges, that they can step back from it and actually apply the law without batting their own particular prejudices. So it was really a disgraceful thing, and an attack on the independence of the judiciary, and really appalling that the person who's a Lord Chancellor, who has a statutory duty to ensure that any attack on the judiciary is named and shamed, was very desultory in stepping forward to actually say that it was a disgrace, and did it in this sort of way of, on the one hand, yes, we have to protect the independence of the judiciary, but we have to protect freedom of speech, and therefore allowing the Daily Mail to feel that it was perfectly okay to do it. I want to talk about the business of whole ways in which I think we're seeing the deprofessionalising of our profession as lawyers. We're actually seeing this business that has to be opened out, that we've somehow got a monopoly on all of this very lucrative business of going into court pro bono. And so I recently had the shock of hearing from colleagues practicing in the north about how somebody had gone to prison, a young man, to the shock of his family, and they felt it had been a miscarriage of justice and he'd been wrongly convicted, but he'd been advised that there wasn't an appeal, and they wanted to pursue this further. And they were really ordinary folk with nothing. And they got together and all sold things, sold cars and so on, to put money together to a shyster who advertises online that he has an outfit that will look at miscarriages of justice, and ended up parting with £50,000 for the kind of advice that any of us in this room would have given, and said that probably the boy didn't have an appeal. And so, you know, the shame of all of this, and this is about introducing competition into the marketplace into our worlds where I think that you've got to be very careful about really degrading the expertise that there is available. But we now know from Michael Gove that expertise is not very valuable in our post-truth times. So I want to talk a minute about two things. The Human Rights Act. I mean, we've been really anxious about this because it's been now in the Conservative manifesto. It's quite clear that Theresa May got very pissed off over the whole Abu Qatada business, and she really does not want us to be subject to the European Court of Human Rights, and it's a particular bug of hers. And my concern about it is that, I mean, actually at the moment it's been parked. So we can feel comfortable. I don't think in 2017 we're going to see anything being done about that, but it will not be forgotten. And so we've got to have it always in our minds that the Human Rights Act is going to be something that will be attacked, and that we are going to have to fight very hard for it. And what they want to replace it with, and I sat on the commission that looked at a British Bill of Rights, what it will be replaced with, you can be absolutely sure will fall short of what has been in the Act. We're not going to get the Human Rights Act plus, it will be the Human Rights Act minus. And they're very clear, they don't want the sort of Baha Musa type case, where, I mean, he would not have got an inquiry if it hadn't been possible for you know, the Human Rights Act to be invoked, and many other circumstances. They want to take the military out of it, and they want to also make it that they can deport people even to places where there might be torture. So there are those issues. I too have concerns, and I was very happy to hear it mention of the fact that we're confronted with secret courts. We're seeing this spreading into areas. Initially it was always, you know, it was just about very difficult cases involving intelligence from abroad, and now it's to prevent the shaming of our security services in the roles that they played in rendition and so on. And I'm very concerned about the spread of secret courts. But I wanted also to talk about the consequences of Brexit. I chair the Justice Subcommittee of, I'm on the European Union Select Committee, and it's got 5 or 6 subcommittees which deal with trade, with finance, with fisheries and agriculture, which deal with a whole set of things. And I do the justice bit, and have some very terrific people on this committee across party. And so we've been hearing evidence around justice issues. And I'm not dealing with crime, there's a home affairs issue. So I'm looking at, first of all, I looked at the business of acquired rights. People who've come to live here, have made their homes here, and who are now, and again, we've been seeing the stories in the press of people who are very fearful of what the implications are. We created a report and we put it out. Had the minister came today to give evidence on it, Jack Jones, and we're saying there should be a unilateral declaration by government. We are going to protect the rights of people, and we are going to make it create a separate and simple system, different from the ordinary residency requirements for those who were living in this country at the point of Brexit or at the point of the declaration. And it should be done even before any negotiation. It shouldn't be part of a negotiation. We should do it unilaterally. And any of us who've been trained as negotiators for mediation or arbitration or anything, we know that putting something good on the table at the very outset wins you goodwill. And actually, you'd find that all the other countries in Europe would reciprocate. But it would be a really good thing for us to do. But I'm afraid there undoubtedly are issues in Downing Street around whether they're prepared to go there. The second thing that we've been doing is taking evidence on the implications for ordinary folk in Britain around law that's been created in Europe. And this fantasy has been created by the Daily Mail that somehow this rush of law came at Britain from Europe, when in fact British lawyers were very active, not just in creating something like the European Convention on Human Rights, but in lots of the law, you know, consumer rights, environmental rights. We were actually, as lawyers, very, very much involved in all of that creation. And now we're going to see threats to employment protections that there are. The whole business of family law, and I know that in the room there are people who have expertise in this field that I don't have, but I mean the whole business that there's been a harmonisation in a way that if you get an order over, you know, there's a divorce and there's a custody of children issue, something, children might be seized or whatever, there's, you know, you can get your order, your judgment in the courts here, and you can, and it will be recognised and accepted in courts all the way across the European Union. And the same thing on consumers' rights, where you buy something. If you buy something from Amazon, it's coming to you from Liechtenstein. You want good consumer rights so you can return stuff that you buy which isn't up to snuff. And that was all Sale of Goods Act stuff that we introduced into consumer rights across Europe. The business of, you know, you go on holiday to Portugal and you rent a car and you're involved in a car accident, getting the insurers to pay up. All those things have been created through regulations in Europe and law that we actually activate here regularly and in our courts. And God knows what they're going to do about all of that. And they're only now getting a sense of the extent of this and how complicated it's going to be. And of course, what people don't want is transitional arrangements, because that's not good for the market. To have anything that's sort of transitional, there isn't certainty. And yet law needs certainty as much as you can get it. You can't always guarantee it, but what this is giving is a certain level of certainty. So there are very real small and medium-sized businesses. It's the ordinary guy who's got some woman who's got a small business, you know. They're doing business with somebody in Italy, you know. They're making cashmere scarves in the borders of Scotland, and they team up with some designers in Italy, and then suddenly, you know, the designers in Italy go bust. Do they get the money back or whatever? You know, so those issues are all simple for pretty ordinary folk. The big guys can always get good lawyering, can always sort their problems, but this is actually important and we never ever made it part of the discussion before, and now we're having to try and unravel it. So, and it's really, this is to do with stuff which is, you know, it's about enforcement. How do you get enforcement of judgments? And it would be very, very hard to see some of those stuff around family law, around consumer rights. And then there's all the stuff that we do on trafficking, that we do on stuff that also affects our lives, importation of drugs and stuff. Great collaborations, working together on terrorism. Whether it's going to really be as effective once we're no longer part of it is going to be a very tangled web of negotiation in the period to come, and whether it can take place in 2 years, God knows. But all I'm saying to all of us is that there are rights embedded in all of this, but what they've made a very clear position about is that the European Court of Justice has to be no part of it. So we're seeing ourselves, you know, becoming more isolationist, and as lawyers that raises many issues for all of us. And so I just wanted to say, if ever there was a need for better discourse around law, better discourse around justice, making sure that people know what the implications of this stuff are for the quality of the society that we live in. Make empathy great again, our photographer has on his shirt. Make empathy great again, and make justice great again. Thank you.